Geographic features disappeared under corpses. As darkness fell, neither army could claim victory. Russians withdrew during night, but in order. French held the field, but at catastrophic cost that would doom them. September 14th, Napoleon stood on Sparrow Hills, overlooking Moscow with its golden domes and ancient Kremlin. After Borodino's horror, here was redemption. His marshals cheered, veterans embraced. The nightmare seemed over. But Moscow was empty. 250,000 inhabitants had vanished. Streets deserted, shops closed, even beggars gone. The Grande Armée entered a city holding its breath. That night, the breathing stopped forever. Governor Rostopchin had prepared the ultimate sacrifice. Hidden in cellars, prisons, and police stations, fire brigades waited not to fight fires, but to start them. At 8 p.m., multiple blazes erupted simultaneously. Within hours, wooden Moscow became an inferno. For 4 days, September 15 to 18, Moscow burned. 75% of the city reduced to ashes. French soldiers expecting winter quarters instead fought flames while discipline collapsed entirely. Looting replaced firefighting. Men emerged from burning mansions laden with useless gold while food burned. Napoleon took residence in the Kremlin, somehow untouched by flames. For 35 fatal days, he waited for Alexander's surrender that would never come. Diplomatic notes went unanswered. Peace overtures met silence. Each day of waiting cost 5,000 more casualties to disease, desertion, and partisan attacks. This decision would cost 100,000 lives. Why did Napoleon stay when his entire career was built on decisive action? Perhaps the city's emptiness paralyzed him. Perhaps admitting retreat meant admitting failure. Perhaps he still believed Alexander would negotiate. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. October arrived with first snow. Supply lines barely functioning ceased entirely. Army strength dropped to 100,000 effectives. Horses, eating thatch from roofs, died by hundreds daily. Men wore theatrical costumes looted from Moscow theaters, silk over rags. October 13th brought early frost. The warning Napoleon had ignored all summer finally manifesting. Temperatures plunged from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 15 overnight. October 19th, Napoleon ordered retreat. They left Moscow 100,000 strong, still an army, still organized. But Napoleon chose the Smolensk road, the same route they'd devastated while advancing. They would retrace their steps through picked clean wasteland. Fatal error. October 27th brought first real snow and temperatures at 20 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. The army dressed for autumn campaign had no winter equipment. Greatcoats became shrouds. Boots dissolved in snow mixed with mud. November 4th, temperature 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body simply stops functioning efficiently at this cold, fingers too numb to load muskets. Wounds that might heal in warmth freeze solid. Men marched asleep, following the man ahead until he collapsed, then stepping over him. What followed wasn't retreat. It was the complete dissolution of human civilization. The Grande Armée ceased being a military force and became a migrating tragedy. Command structure vanished. Colonels commanded dozens instead of thousands. Generals led whoever would follow. November temperatures kept plunging. -5 degrees, -10, -15, -20. Men discovered new ways to die with each degree drop. Breath freezing in lungs, eyeballs freezing open. Touching metal with bare skin meant losing the skin. Stopping to rest meant never moving again. Cavalry units that had pranced into Russia in glory now walked, leading skeletal horses they couldn't bring themselves to eat until starvation. Over came sentiment. Then they ate them raw, because fires wouldn't lighten wind. Russian peasants took revenge with medieval cruelty. Stragglers were found with eyes gouged, tongues cut out, buried alive in snow. French atrocities during the advance were repaid with interest compounded by hatred. War became personal and barbaric, but Russian regular army held back. Kutuzov, criticized for not attacking, understood perfect strategy. Why waste Russian lives? Winter is winning. Follow, harass, but let General Winter command. The wisdom proved correct as French died by thousands daily from cold alone. November 26th, 1812. The Berezina River. Here, at this frozen barrier, 3 Russian armies converged to annihilate Napoleon's remnants completely. 50,000 Russians against 30,000 effective French. The trap was perfect and inescapable, but General Eblé, Napoleon's engineering genius, performed the impossible. In negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, his engineers waded into freezing water to build 2 bridges. Dutch pontooniers worked until their limbs literally froze solid. They hammered with hands that would never feel again, sacrificing themselves for the army. 400 engineers entered the water. 8 survived functional. The crossing began November 27th. What happened over the next 4 days defied every concept of military order. This wasn't a river crossing. It was continental collapse compressed into one geographic choke point. 30,000 soldiers crossed first, maintaining some discipline. Behind pressed 20,000 stragglers and civilians, the human detritus following every army. Russian artillery found the range. Cannonballs didn't just kill in packed masses on narrow bridges, they caused chain reaction stampedes. The panic scenes broke veteran minds. Women threw children into the river trying to save themselves. Wounded men were trampled into bridge planking. When bridges clogged with corpses, the living walked on the dead. Temperature dropped to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The Berezina, not fully frozen, became a trap. Men fell through ice, grabbed others for support, pulled them down. Chains of drowning humanity formed. Those who reached the opposite bank often froze before they could climb out, ice sculptures of attempted salvation. Thousands remained on the eastern bank when Russian pressure became unbearable. Orders came, blow the bridges. Eblé delayed, begging for more time. Each hour meant more Russian casualties, but saved French lives. Finally, dawn November 29th, Eblé ordered destruction. Stragglers on bridges were blown into the river. Those on wrong bank were abandoned. Their screams carried for miles. The Berezina statistics: 25,000 casualties in 4 days. But this understates the horror. Entire family groups of camp followers vanished. The Grande Armée's civilian tail, merchants, wives, prostitutes, servants, ceased to exist in 4 days of concentrated death. After Berezina, the word army became mockery. What stumbled west were armed ghosts. Negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit made death instantaneous. Flesh froze in minutes. Men discovered that severe frostbite made amputation painless. Frozen limbs snapped off like icicles. The final mathematics were simple and terrible. Of 600,000 who entered Russia, 100,000 reached Moscow. Of 100,000 who left Moscow, 30,000 reached Berezina. Of 30,000 who crossed Berezina, 10,000 remained in organized units. The rest were the walking dead. Cannibalism reports multiplied, not rumor, but documented fact. Sergeant Burgon described finding men roasting human flesh openly, not hiding anymore. Civilization's veneer cracked completely. Men became wolves. Marshal Ney commanded the rear guard with 3,000 men holding off Russian pursuit. By December, he led 20 survivors. The bravest of the brave was the last French marshal to leave Russia, musket in hand, personally shooting at Cossacks. When asked later how he survived, he answered, "I no longer knew if I was alive or dead." December 5th, Napoleon abandoned his army. The decision, militarily sound because he needed to reach Paris before news of catastrophe, felt like betrayal to dying men. He left at midnight in secret with minimal escort. The god of war fled his own apocalypse. 22,000 crossed the Niemen in December. But were they an army? Units existed on paper only. The Imperial Guard, 50,000 strong in June, numbered 1,500. Some regiments were commanded by sergeants, all officers dead. What survived wasn't military force, but traumatized individuals who'd entered Russia as Europe's conquerors and crawled out as frostbitten beggars. The human aftermath defied accounting and haunted Europe for generations. 580,000 men entered Russia. 480,000 never returned. But statistics hide individual tragedies that multiplied the horror. How many wives waited for husbands who'd become frozen corpses at Berezina? How many children grew up fatherless because Napoleon couldn't accept Alexander's defiance? The physical aftermath littered Russia for years. Spring 1813 revealed the retreat's full horror. a 1,000-mile corridor of corpses. Peasants burned bodies all summer. Mass graves were still being discovered in the 1,950 seconds during Soviet construction projects. Environmental devastation, forests burned, fields destroyed, cities erased, took decades to heal. The Grande Armée died in Russia, but something else was born from its frozen corpse. Within 6 months of the Russian catastrophe, Napoleon faced not one enemy, but a continent united by his weakness. The coalition of 1,813, Prussia, Austria, Russia, Sweden, eventually Britain, represented something new: nationalism awakened by Napoleon's own conquests. The mathematics of empire had reversed. Where Napoleon once commanded 600,000, he now scraped together 200,000 raw conscripts. Boys of 16 and men of 50 filled ranks where veterans once stood. The Leipzig campaign of 1,813, the Battle of the Nations, saw former allies become enemies. The empire built over a decade crumbled in months. Russian victory wasn't about tactics or strategy, it was about space, time, and will. Kutuzov's genius lay not in fighting, but in understanding that Russia itself was the weapon, the vast distances that swallowed armies, the scorched earth that left nothing, the winter that killed more effectively than bullets. This lesson echoed through history. Hitler, ignoring 1,812's lesson, repeated Napoleon's march to catastrophe in 1941. The Soviet Union's survival drew directly from 1,812's playbook of space, sacrifice, and scorched earth. Military science transformed overnight after Napoleon's catastrophe. Logistics, previously secondary to tactics, became paramount. Napoleon proved you could win every battle and still lose the war if you couldn't feed your army. Modern military planning's obsession with supply lines traces directly to frozen corpses on the Smolensk road. The philosophical impact cut deepest into European consciousness. Enlightenment thinking assumed reason could conquer nature. Napoleon embodied this belief. Human will and genius could achieve anything. His destruction by Russian winter represented nature's revenge on human hubris. The Romantic movement, emphasizing emotion over reason, nature over civilization, drew power from images of the Grande Armée devoured by snow and cold. Nationalism, birthed in resistance to Napoleon, became the 19th century's dominant force. Germans, Italians, Poles, divided peoples who'd served in the Grande Armée, returned home with new consciousness. The army meant to unite Europe under French rule, instead planted seeds of national independence that would bloom into the century's revolutions. The individual stories haunted Europe for generations. Veterans missing noses, ears, and fingers from frostbite became living reminders, walking through every European city. Grognards, the Growlers, Napoleon's old guard, spent decades in cafes retelling horror stories. Their grandchildren inherited not glory, but nightmares. Modern parallels multiply when you study later conflicts. Afghanistan, called Graveyard of Empires, echoes Russia's spatial defense. Vietnam's jungle-swallowing technological superiority mirrors winter-defeating tactical genius. The lesson remains constant. Military power has limits, and those limits are often climatic and geographic rather than human. What makes the Russian campaign eternally relevant is its demonstration that even genius must bow before geography, that even emperors must respect reality, that even the greatest army ever assembled was in the end just men who could freeze. 600,000 men crossed the Niemen believing they were invincible. Napoleon's genius, European military supremacy, technological advantage over barbarian Russia. 22,000 returned knowing that nature, not man, is history's ultimate judge. The 96% casualty rate stands as history's warning about hubris, logistics, and underestimating both geography and climate as weapons. Napoleon conquered nations through brilliant tactics, but was destroyed by something he never considered an enemy: the very earth itself, the distances that swallowed supply lines, the heat that killed horses, the cold that froze men where they stood. The Grande Armée didn't just die in Russia. It proved that genius has limits. Every conqueror since measures himself against Napoleon's ghost, frozen in Russian snow. When military planners say, remember Moscow, they mean, remember that geography can trump tactics, that nature remains unconquered, that the longest supply line is a noose around your own neck. The lesson written in 580,000 corpses, respect the land you invade or it becomes your grave. Subscribe to Great History for more battles where environmental warfare defeated military genius and impossible odds became mathematical certainty.